This roundtable session will focus on China-EU relations beyond the next 50 years. China and the European Union marks over 50 years of diplomatic relations at a time when the global order is undergoing profound restructuring. As the international community confronts geopolitical fragmentation, supply chain realignments, the climate challenges, and the rise of new digital and technological power centers, China-EU relations have become increasingly central to the question of whether multilateralism can be preserved and renewed in the decade ahead. China and the EU remain major stakeholders in global governance, each committed in principle to multilateral institutions and rules-based cooperation. Yet, strategic outlooks differ in key areas including trade policy, digital governance, the human rights, industrial subsidies, and the security priorities. At the same time, the EU's pursuit of de-risking and China's push to high standard openness and the evolving roles of regional actors and emerging economies shapes a complex environment for diplomatic engagement. Whether the two sides can maintain stable cooperation while managing structural differences will significantly influence the future of global economic stability, climate action, and institutional reform. This session brings together leading European and Chinese scholars, policy advisors, think tank directors, and representatives of diplomatic and industry organizations to assess the long-term trajectory of China-EU relations through examining shared interest, policy gaps, and emerging areas of collaboration from green transition and digital standard to global health, the infrastructure connectivity, and WTO modernization. The session seeks to identify the practical pathway to uphold multilateralism and avoid strategic drift. The discussion emphasizes not only state-to-state diplomacy, but also the role of civil society networks, academic communities, and the industry partnerships in sustaining constructive engagement over the next 50 years and beyond. So today we have the participants in the roundtable, and so I would like to introduce the Carolin Albrecht, the founding manager director, Berlin Global Dialogue, Elisa Hörhager, the chief representative, German Federation of Industry in China, and Lu Yongquan, the president, China CNPC, Economics and Technology Research Institute, the Christopher Berliner, the founding member and the vice chairman of the Eurasia Society in Berlin, Germany. Eberhard Sander-Schneider, I think he is already introduced in the morning, and Mr. Sun Yongfu also is introduced in the morning. I will not repeat. And Mr. Wang Yue, John Monet Chair, Professor of European Union Studies, Renmin University of China, and Zhang Yuqi, the Vice President of Huajian Group. And at the end, we will have also from Yang, the leader, the GYLD, Mr. Li Guotai from Vietnam, is policy officer, European Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. So I would like to ask the speakers to choose one or two the questions within the maximum 5 minutes. Then we have the following questions. The first, what are the main structural drivers shaping China-EU relations in the coming decades? And how can both sides balance cooperation with the strategic differences? The second, how can China and the EU safeguard multilateralism amid rising geopolitical rivalry and weakening trust in global institutions? The third, in what areas such as climate governance, green finance, energy transition, digital regulation, and global health, do China and the EU have the greatest potential to deepen collaboration? The fourth, how is the EU's approach to de-risking and China's economic modernization and openness agenda reshaping business confidence, technology partnerships, and the supply chain strategies? The fifth, what role can international organizations, non-state actors, academic cooperation, and cultural engagement play in sustaining long-term mutual understanding and a stable dialogue between China and the EU? Okay, first I would like to ask Carolin Albrecht to take the floor, please.
Thank you so much. And thank you to CCG for bringing us together today. By way of introduction, Berlin Global Dialogue is a forum based in Berlin that brings together political and business leaders to discuss the impacts of geopolitical shifts on the global economy. And of course, you can't discuss the global economy without having China at the table. So since we've started Berlin Global Dialogue 3 years ago, we've established a regular exchange with the Development Research Center of the State Council, as well as with the broader business community in China. And I'm very glad to continue that exchange here with all of you today as well. I want to offer a perspective on two of the questions that you've posed to us. The first one on the main structural drivers shaping the China-EU relations in the coming decades, as well as on the question of how we can together safeguard multilateralism. So regarding the structural drivers, first of all, I think we need to acknowledge that we are witnessing a complete recalibration of the economic relationship between the EU and China. For the past 2 decades, growth in Europe and China was complementary. The industrialization and growing prosperity here in China created demands for Europe's products, especially in Germany. That meant that there was a high demand for machine engineering, chemicals, and automotive industry for export. So that was a win-win situation, and we were able to grow together. Today, China has overtaken Europe in many areas of manufacturing and has also become an innovation powerhouse, as we heard earlier today as well. Of course, there's a question if trade deficits are good or not bad, but just to give you something on a perspective, this year the trade deficit of Germany with China will grow to 87 billion euros, up to 20 billion euro compared to last year. So just to give you an idea of the trends that we're seeing. At the same time, due to the broader geopolitical competition and also concerns about dependencies, we're also seeing a leading securitization of everything. So from supply chain, data, energy infrastructure, there's a clear focus on resilience and strategic autonomy over efficiency. Companies are a lot more likely to accept higher costs if it reduces their geopolitical exposures. And there's also increased investments from governments and companies on areas such as defense, space, AI, as well as resilient digital infrastructure. So economic logic is still very important, but security considerations are now setting the boundaries and are also a key driver of economic strategy and decisions. So all of that is to say that the relationship between China and Europe has fundamentally shifted in its power and its interest. And I think, first of all, we just have to accept that reality because it will inform the path that we have ahead of us. And I think in this new setting, we have to be realistic that finding win-win scenarios is going to be a lot harder than it has been for the last 2 decades. Because of that, I believe that multilateralism will be very essential for us to keep finding common ground. Both Europe and China share the core belief that multilateral cooperation provides more benefit than unilateral action. We heard a lot about that this morning when we talked about the future of the United Nations. And I think there's still a lot of areas across climate, green finance, AI, global health, and also development where we can find areas of win-win corporations and where our interests are more closely aligned. So I think in a lot of ways, our mission is not just for China and Europe to work together to safeguard multilateralism, but I also think that actually our joint efforts for multilateralism can be a safeguard to protect Europe and China as we renegotiate our economic partnership. As we all know, multilateral institutions are in desperate need for reform, but we should not abandon them. So it will be a balancing act in the coming decades to uphold the existing multilateral institutions while establishing stronger bilateral and plurilateral agreements, which can maybe deliver quicker results on issue-based coalitions, whilst the multilateral institutions are undergoing the reforms that are needed. Lastly, I think it's important that we do not fall into the trap of believing that we need to choose sides. I believe in a multipolar world, partnerships and alliances will become a lot more fluent and flexible based on joint interest and specific issues. And that flexibility requires a lot of engagement, ongoing engagement across a lot of different issues, trust, and I hope we can continue the China-EU partnership based on the spirit of friends, not camps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we had a very long discussion during the lunch. The very small lunch we didn't finish, and so thank you for your sharing your opinion. So next, I would like to call Ms. Elisa Hörhager to give her opinion, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Habing. Thank you, CCG, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to join today's discussion. Let me just briefly state I represent the Federation of German Industries, otherwise known as BDI. And we're the umbrella organization of German industry and industry-related services. And that's why in my remarks, I'm going to focus on the first question that you asked, Mr. Han, which is what the main structural drivers are that are shaping China-EU relations. Because I believe that this is a question that captures the situation that industry across Europe and China is actually navigating at the moment. And the reality is that these structural drivers are increasingly defined by imbalances, and they lie in the evolving economic relationship between the EU and China. China's share of global industrial production has risen enormously and very rapidly. It's now at around 30%, and it's projected to reach around 45% by 2030. And this shift is mirrored in trade flows as well. Germany's trade deficit, for example, with China, it just reached a record 87.6 billion euros last year, surpassing the previous peak in 2022. And exports from Germany to China have declined sharply, while China is Germany's largest supplier by a wide margin, with particularly strong increases in, among others, imports in electrical equipment and machinery. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me just focus on the machinery sector for a while, because I believe that it illustrates how these structural trends and changes are actually affecting industry and impacting trade relations, but also ultimately the wider EU-China relationship. So up until 3 years ago, Germany was the world's leading exporter of machinery, Exportweltmeister in machineries. But today that title belongs to China, and Chinese machineries Chinese machinery manufacturers are highly competitive in both products and pricing. Research by the IMF, the OECD, and others links this shift to, among other factors, extensive industrial subsidization. Subsidies are certainly not the only factor, but they do have a clear impact on industry beyond China. Under programs such as Made in China 2025, subsidized exports of electrical machinery have been found to be roughly 7% higher than exports of non-subsidized products. On the import side, subsidies suppress imports of targeted goods to China compared to non-targeted ones, an effect that IMF researchers do not observe to the same extent in other economies. In practical terms, what this means is that industrial policies expand China's export share and reduce its import share in subsidized product categories, with supply chain linkages amplifying these effects. Subsidies given to upstream industries expand significantly also the exports of downstream industries. So industrial policy, it's also increasingly being justified on national security grounds, or what we might call a certain securitization of industrial policy, as the previous speaker mentioned. And this is adding even further strain. China's export restrictions on rare earth elements and magnets, all items which are critical for European manufacturing, they continue to create vulnerabilities and uncertainty deep in our supply chains. Such measures, they only serve to highlight the risks associated with Europe's asymmetric dependencies, risks that have become impossible to overlook. Chinese experts describe an economic model driven heavily by supply-side expansion rather than domestic demand. We heard this morning as well. And so, continuing to subsidize mature industries long after they've reached global competitiveness undermines fair competition and fuels political tension, ultimately. There are compelling studies by Chinese academics from universities in Beijing, Shandong, and Nanjing, among others, which outline how subsidies for China's NEV sector continued on for too long. By 2015, China was already the global leader in NEV production and sales. And yet, from 2015 to 2018, total government spending on NEV subsidies roughly tripled compared to the preceding years. So subsidies continuing beyond this point contributed to subsidy dependence, reducing companies' incentives for genuine technological innovation, and even encouraging waste. So a part of the objective of this program, of course, was to enhance industrial competitiveness of Chinese automakers in the global market, catering to external demand. And this is where countries, such as in Europe, with an existing auto industry face difficulty, because subsidies promote Chinese exports and, on the other hand, limit imports. This is true not just in the auto industry, but in all sectors prioritized by Chinese industrial policy. And it makes China's current growth model an issue for the rest of the world, but especially for the EU, because China has increasingly taken Europe's market share in a host of manufacturing sectors. So this level of subsidization is bad for innovation of individual companies, and a lot of studies show that as well. And despite these challenges, though, I believe there are constructive avenues to address these imbalances. For both the EU and China, it's clearly in our shared interest to avoid an escalation of reciprocal tariffs. Avoiding escalation is only possible if the underlying causes of the imbalance are addressed. One concrete step could, for example, be for China to engage in strategic and detailed discussions with the EU on ways of reducing the most competition-distorting subsidy measures, or at least their negative impact on value creation in Europe. Such talks could help prevent a continued subsidy spiral in China and corresponding defensive measures in the EU, and would benefit both sides. And the incentive to engage in such discussions, of course, will increase as Europe's market access becomes more coveted. And therefore, this will allow space an off-ramp, if you will, to rebalance economic relationship. At the same time, I believe that there are encouraging signs in macroeconomic adjustment within China, as outlined, for example, in proposals for the current 15th year plan. And strengthening domestic consumption, which is obviously on the agenda, allowing a more market-driven appreciation of the renminbi, all of this would help reduce trade imbalances and also contribute to a more stable long-term economic relationship with Europe. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question before us is how China and the EU can balance cooperation with strategic differences. It can't be answered by trade policy alone, clearly. But if we are serious about stabilizing EU-China relations to the benefit of sustainable economic development on both continents, then the steps outlined above seem unavoidable as well as mutually beneficial. Clear, enforceable commitments on fair competition are essential if we want to build a resilient and balanced partnership for the decades to come, providing room for future complementarities and mutual benefit from economic development on both continents.
Thank you for sharing your opinion, and thank you for your very frank. I think this is good to have such discussion. Maybe some your opinion we need to discussion further, but we don't have time now. But anyway, I'm very thankful and glad that we can discuss in this occasion in a very frank way. Yeah. Okay. Next, I would like to ask Mr. Lu Ruquan to share your opinion.
Okay. And I'm from an energy think tank, and I will share my viewpoints from the perspective of China-EU energy cooperation and competition. And we know that energy cooperation is a key area in which China and the EU could practice and promote the truly multilateralism. However, right now, I think EU take China not only as a cooperative partner, but also an economic competitor and also a systematic rival. So China-EU energy relations present to be a complex picture. On the one hand, in the context of EU's de-risking strategy on China, the two sides have increasingly become competitors on supply chain related to the energy transition and energy security. For example, in the fields of EV, electrical vehicles, and the batteries, the EU is seeking to limit cooperation with Chinese enterprises through instruments such as tariffs and CBAM, that is carbon border adjustment mechanism. And it has adopted the Critical Raw Material Act to diversify supply chain partners and reduce dependence on raw materials from China. The fundamental drive of de-risking of EU is that dependence on Russia for oil and gas must not be replaced by dependence on China for new and renewable energy technologies. This mindset has led the EU to re-examine its approach to energy security. Some member states have slowed the path of energy transition, redirected oil and gas imports toward the United States, and moved towards a more exclusive energy structure, which will lead China-EU relations into a systematic competition period. However, China and the EU share similar energy concerns, common energy objectives, complementary energy industrial capabilities, and companies with strong capability as well as willingness for cooperation. The two sides have jointly promoted the energy transition and are partners and stakeholders in strengthening global climate governance. So first, these two sides have established multi-level mechanisms for policy consultation and dialogue, such as the EU-China high-level dialogue on environment and climate. Let's say as of July 2025, actually 6 meetings have been already held within this framework. Second, the two sides have engaged in a complementary industrial cooperation. The EU enjoys significant resources and technological advantage in wind power, while China is able to supply key components at a low cost. These two sides, both EU and China, have formed a pattern of complementarity with in-depth cooperation in such areas as wind turbine technology and the development and operation of offshore wind projects. Within the framework of the China-EU Hydrogen Energy Cooperation Forum, the two sides cooperate along the entire hydrogen value chain: production, storage, and transportation, and end-use application in technology R&D, standard setting, and demonstration projects. Third, the two sides have delivered a series of flagship projects. Notable examples include the, let's say, Daya Bay nuclear power plant in China, and also the Tres wind power project in Greece, and the Dolan solar PV park in Germany, all of which stand as landmark achievements of China-EU energy cooperation. So generally, we can say China and the EU have broader prospects in upholding multilateralism and advancing the energy transition. I would recommend that within the framework of climate governance, the two sides should first take a concrete action to defend the international regime centered on the United Nations. That means UNFCCC, that's the Climate Change Organization, and the Paris Agreement, and jointly provide institutional public goods for the global energy transition. Second, strengthen cooperation on subsectors of renewable energy. In complementary subsectors of energy, encourage enterprises from both sides to increase investment in each other and set up a factory locally. Third, expand cooperation in global oil and gas market by encouraging Chinese and European oil and gas companies to engage in jointly exploitation and development worldwide, and help stabilize the supply of oil and gas resources. And fourth, deepening the third market cooperation on the development of critical minerals by encouraging Chinese and European enterprises to jointly develop such resources in regions including Africa and Latin America, and to establish China-US joint ventures, refining and processing facilities in Europe. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lu. I think the energy sector is the potential area that the China and the EU could have very good cooperation. In this energy sector, there's a lot of subsectors, also, or the concrete products or the concrete productions. But I think we could find the products or the technologies that we can cooperate very successfully. Next, I would like to ask Mr. Christopher Boliner to share your, to take your opinion.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I think for both, I mean, the European Union and China and the relation between the European Union and China, I mean, the most important question is the future of the international order. I mean, what will it look like? What place will the EU and China occupy in it? how long will the transitional phase take from the current order to a new one? And very importantly, I mean, will the transition be peaceful or violent? And I think an increasing number of people sees the world at a crossroad between war and peace. That's also how the Chinese Minister of Defense put it at the Xiangshan Forum. And when we look back in history, I mean, there is some reason to believe that there's a risk. The track record is not positive. I mean, we see the Westphalian system as the basis of our modern international order. But that was established after the 30 Years' War in Europe. The same is true for the League of Nations, which was established after the First World War, and for the United Nations after the Second. And often, I mean, the pattern was such that you had the failure of an established order, then you had a war, and then you had a new order. But before the war, there were often many discussions on solutions, on reforms of the international system. The League of Nations was mentioned this morning, but the idea was also brought up before World War I. And I have the feeling that we're at a similar situation at the moment. I mean, everybody feels that something is changing. It was very obvious in the uprun of the BRICS summit in 2023 in South Africa, for instance, that a format that was established by 4 countries originally was extended by 1 additional country in a period of 20 years, and then out of a sudden 40 countries wanted to join. So you see that there's an obvious need for reform, and we discussed it this morning. I think China has quite a successful track record in moving people out of poverty and development, and also in a peaceful foreign policy. Since 1971, the country hasn't been involved in any armed conflict. And I think, I mean, on our side, on the side of the European Union, it would be good to do a bit less finger-pointing and to maybe engage more in discussions to better understand Chinese ideas to reform the international system, also involve more other actors, which would probably also allow us to develop some new ideas. So, I mean, the Chinese proposals don't have to be the last word, but we can maybe also develop other ideas, additional ones to the Global Gateway initiative that we developed. Linked to that is the question of the international security architecture. I mean, most pillars that we have somehow built in the past to stabilize the international system have disappeared. And that didn't start in 2022. I mean, the ABM Treaty disappeared 20 years before that. INF disappeared, Open Skies disappeared. And also for the remaining pillars, I mean, they are shaking. New START, there's a question mark if that will continue. The NPT Treaty, the revision that will come up next year, it's not clear how that will work. So, I mean, the EU is not a main actor in all of that, but it's of vital interest for us. And at the moment, I don't see any EU-Russia dialogue on this. There's too little. I mean, there's something, but too little EU-China dialogue on this. There is no trilateral dialogue between Russia, China, and the United States. And I think we can simply not afford that. I mean, when we assume that the world is at a crossroad, that the international system changes when we have an armed conflict in Europe, the biggest one since World War II, then I think we need to get together and we need to develop new ideas. It was mentioned this morning that we said we need to pool ideas and wisdoms. And the answers are not simple. I mean, the strategic environment has changed. So it will involve quite some thinking to come up with ideas for a new security architecture. Another point I think we urgently need to focus on is financial stability. I mean, people here in Asia remember the Asian financial crisis. We all remember the financial crisis 2007, 2008. I think the financial system, the international one, is not in a better shape at the moment. I mean, the debt levels of many countries, including many major countries, and also countries in the EU, are simply not sustainable. And yes, we have EU-China dialogue on financial stability, but I don't think it's enough. I don't think that we are prepared to stabilize the financial system, and we are certainly also not prepared for a major financial crisis. To end on a maybe positive point, I mean, coming and being based in Berlin, I know that the idea of discussing the perspective of a renewed cooperation with Russia is not very popular in the EU at the moment. But I think we should never underestimate the power of ideas also in solving problems. And I mean, China has tabled quite a number of positive ideas, global initiatives, the Belt and Road Initiative. We have our Global Gateway Initiative. If we work together on a positive vision for the Eurasian continent, I think that can help us to move away from the discussions we have at the moment, on arms, ammunition, sanctions, possible military conflict, to focusing our energy on peaceful coexistence, cooperative relations between the countries of Europe and Asia.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olenar. I'm quite agree about your opinion about the dialogue. You mentioned that there's no dialogue between EU and Russia. It's little dialogue between EU and China. It's just a lot of dialogue between the US and the EU. We need the dialogue. And I think without dialogue, we will go to the no result. So I think I quite agree on you. That so anyway, what the difference we have to communicate each other. Yeah. Next, I would like to ask Albrecht Sandschneider to give their opinion.
Thank you so much again for giving me the opportunity to share a few ideas with you on EU-China relations. But let me start with your last remark, Mr. Chairman. I am certainly absolutely in favor of dialogue. But let us remind ourselves, dialogue does not necessarily lead to success. You might end up in misunderstandings, in conflicts. So dialogue is an important prerequisite for the organization of bilateral relations, but not an automatic instrument of success. Let's keep in mind what I just said, because I would first start with drawing your attention again to the last 50 years of official relations between China and the European Union. And my overall assessment is, what a success based on the expectations back in 1975. No one would ever have assumed that our economic and political relations would develop as they did. And let me also remind you, in the first years, the European Union started by calling China first a partner. In the next conceptual paper, it was a strategic partner. Then it became an enhanced strategic partner. And at that time, I was joking, the next step will be offering membership to China, to the European Union. But as we have heard the morning, we have reached several inflection points. And for me, today, in today's perspective, the biggest problem is the fact that we are securitizing and weaponizing our trade relations. That's perhaps not the origin in China and not in Europe, but we have an American friend who is always with us as the invisible third party. But this is the major challenge, and what we have heard so far, there are so many opportunities in our bilateral relations, but there are also obstacles. And these obstacles have led, if I'm not completely wrong at the moment, to a high level of mutual frustration on both sides. And while I'm here in China for the last week, I was confronted again and again, almost on a daily basis, with the frustration on the Chinese side. And let me for a moment come back to what you have heard in the diplomatical addresses this morning. And don't forget, I'm speaking to you as a citizen of the European Union. The European Union, in my perspective, is a very ununited union. If you are asking for Europe's China policy, don't only look to Brussels. That's perhaps one important aspect, but you have to look at 27 plus 1. Each and every member state of the European Union has its, or her, whatever you call it, own perspective on China, plus Brussels. So it's difficult to deal with this European Union in a Chinese perspective. And the famous, you may remember Henry Kissinger asking for the telephone number of Europe, so better prepare yourself to get 28 numbers in your booklets. Europe itself, and that is important to know if you are seeking for understanding our bilateral relations, is in at least two big dilemmata. And the most important dilemma is it's an unbelievable success story. Never forget that. If you take Europe's history, when all this started in the early 1950s, no one ever would have expected Europe to be where it is today. No one. It is a success story, but in success lies the germ of failure. The biggest success in my reading of the European Union is helping stabilize the transformation processes in Central and Eastern Europe after 1989. That was important, that was a success. But at the same time, it led to a simple dilemma. The dilemma is the European Union is overstretched externally and over-regulated internally. Remember this morning, that really caught my attention, the ambassador saying, regulation is not fast enough. That is one of the European diseases compared to China. We do not need regulation, we need learning about social media. But Europeans start with regulation first, before they continue with developing technology. And my impression is, in this country, you are proceeding exactly the opposite way, and much more successful. So in the end, this inflection point we may have reached in the official diplomatic speech, yes, might be there, but it is an inflection point which is also characterized by a big division in attitudes towards China between politics on the one hand and business on the other. My impression is that while politics is getting ever more critical of China, weaponizing some of the aspects of our relations, as I said, business is continuing, despite all problems which have been mentioned, to regard China as what China really is, one of the most important markets of the future, and I don't know any business person in Germany who does not want to be part of action on the biggest market of the future. So the perspective is waiting for us is hard work, especially in the political sphere. We have lost trust, we have lost mutual understanding, and we are all challenged to help contribute to overcoming this lack of trust. And my personal, if I should be asked to end on an optimistic note, I'm pretty sure that growing international pressure, global pressure, necessitates less fundamentalism in our bilateral relations and more pragmatism. That is perhaps something we Europeans can learn from China, and hopefully we do. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sander Schneider. I think yes, your thinking is we need to look at our relationship not weaponized, and we need to better understand each other. Next, I would like to ask Mr. Sun Yongfu to give his opinion.
Thank you very much for having me to participate in this dialogue. It's very interesting. I noted that most, if not all, the panelists for this afternoon are mainly from Germany. But I think it's quite natural because Germany is the #1 trading partner for 40 years. If we see China-EU economic and trade relations, and I was part of that for a little bit more than 12 years, as I was the DG for European Department of MOFCOM. I'm quite lucky that in my time, the economic and trade relationship between China and EU was very good. We are on a very healthy track, I think, comparing with present situation. I think we are a little bit out of track, and there is no enough trust between each other, as mentioned by previous speakers. And we had some trade frictions when we were during that period of time, and say textile and solar panels, but we have rules to obey, that is WTO. So through negotiations, through dialogue, we can more or less solve our trade frictions. But now it's difficult. And Germany still is our #1 trading partner within the EU, and is the most important trading partner for us. It's more or less 1/3 our bilateral trade, China, EU, and Germany places a very important one-third or 1/4 of our bilateral trade. So the role of Germany is very important in shaping the bilateral trade and economic cooperation between China and EU as a whole. Now, I think it's quite complicated, as mentioned. How should we treat EU separately to deal with the member states of EU as 27 members, or we need to discuss more with Brussels as a union? Because my feeling is that in order to solve the individual problems of member states, they always concentrate on all their requirement to Brussels, so that they can put everything in a group to discuss with our top leaders. But for those individual members, only for those, happy sectors, we don't have too much problems, but put the difficult items to Brussels. So it's difficult for China to discuss with the EU, with the Brussels. And I still can recall that for those HEDs, they have high-level economic dialogue, it's very difficult to answer all the questions concentrated from all the members of the EU. And the questionnaire is too high, it's too long. So I think right now we see more and more competition instead of complementary economic relations. And from 2019, China is labeled as 3 categories, as mentioned before: partner, competitor, and systematic rivalry. I think the worry is that more and more systematic rivalry is on the top agenda, instead of having real dialogue on cooperations, like Christoph last comments mentioned. I think we need to concentrate on cooperation fields, especially in the green technologies, solar panel, for example, EV cars, and others. We have a lot to explore the fields of cooperation, and don't pay too much attention to the so-called the de-risking or systematic rivalry. So we need to have our trade relations back on track. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sun. So he was the DG of Department for European Affairs in the MOFCOM for the long term. I think in that time, and economic relations between China and the EU was quite nice. and he did a very big contribution to that. That time, and then there are some the problems, but not so headache like now. So I think his opinion shared with us is very constructive. Yeah. And I would like to ask Mr. Wang Yue to share his opinion.
Thank you. I just come back from Brussels, attending the China-EU forum organized by the Friends of Europe and the Chinese mission to the European Union in memory of the 50 years. I have two very strange messages from there. One is the Europeans think about Ukraine as our core interests. China asked Europe to respect Taiwan as a core national interest. Why you do not respect Ukraine? I said Taiwan is a core national interest of China. Ukraine is a core interest of Europe, not a national, because Ukraine not joined European Union yet, so it's not your territory. So it's different. Okay. Secondly, the very worried about so-called 2027 China will use force to unify Taiwan, and read the 15th five-year plan, because they say very clearly to promote the national unification process. But the misunderstanding of that, in Chinese it says 推进祖国统一大业，民族复兴伟业。民族和祖国。
The Chinese nation's rejuvenation 以及 the reunion of Taiwan. So these are two different words.
It's great. It's a good challenge. So it's no misunderstanding. Better to speak Chinese and talk to that. Then I have 5 suggestions, time limited, because Europeans have many complaints about that. I say, if you complain today, you will lose tomorrow. If you complain tomorrow, you will lose the day after tomorrow. So better the views of the tomorrow from the day after tomorrow. So Deng Xiaoping said at the very earlier of the opening reform, said, 解放思想, emancipate of the mind. So I have 5 解放思想 suggestions. Number 1, from cooperation to co-creation. Win-win, maybe you say one China wins twice. But digital and green transition, creation should jointly shape the future. I think that's for the human civilization. So for the financial and the service, we still have lots of opportunities to cooperate. Traditional manufacturing may be competition. Second, from I think the current market to the future market, for instance, the aging society, AI, I think it's a future market. The UNESCO center located in Shanghai, I think that the key differences between Chinese and the Europeans, your young people playing the post-modern art, Chinese young people working very hard in a laboratory. So that's basically we need to focus on that. Thirdly, from national level or EU level to regional level, when I visited Italy, Toscana and there are many regions very active, embrace of China. Whether maybe in China we can have office for them, for the regional province or region, right? You have regional representatives in Brussels. So we need to evaluate our mind. Fourthly, from traditional to non-traditional security. Traditional security, you are limited with the Huawei, 5G, but for other non-traditional data, for instance, the data of the tourists, I think we need lots of cooperation. When I visited France, still very old to have the video and the guide, auto guide. In China, everything is digital. Scan the WeChat, everything translation. It's very popular now. Even Alipay. Number 5, I think also we need to from the new infrastructure cooperation. The older infrastructure, lots of problem, but not just Europeans Global Gateway Initiative, Chinese Belt Road Initiative, and also third-party market cooperation. China now, the Zhongji to China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, the railway extend from across the Caspian Sea and from Azerbaijan, Turkey, and then reach Europe. This is directly connect each other because the China-Europe Express cut by the Ukraine war, and also sometimes the Poland also close. So I think that's make our straight connections in a new infrastructure building. I think lots of the opportunities to cooperate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wang. I think it's 5 areas of what he mentioned is very constructive thinking. And in these areas, some should be a very good area, and then the potential area for the successful cooperation between China and the EU. So next, I would like to ask Mrs. Zhang Yuqi. She is Vice President of Huajian Group, which is a big company for the footwear production. This is from the enterprise. Where I would like to hear the opinion from the enterprise.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our company is Huajian Group. It's the local private company making shoewares. And then we relocated our manufacturing in Africa. So now I want to share with you from the perspective of a Chinese entrepreneur in Chinese business and about how we regard China-EU relations. And China has been a manufacturing power for thousands of years. But our Chinese products were imported into Europe and into America and also to African countries. And our shoes have been exported to other countries. But wherever I am, I must depend on China's supply chain. Why? Because I'm sure many of you have lived in China more or less. What you really experience here is the high level of convenience. Now China has 1.4 billion people, and China has the best and most developed supply chain in the world that is unrivaled in any part of the world, any country of the world. So China plays an indispensable role in the global supply chain. And there's no country in this world that would not want to connect with China. Otherwise, they would lose some potential access to this global supply chain, whether in aspect of living standards, so be it developed countries in Europe and in America, or developed countries in Africa, we all need Chinese products. So closing door is not a good choice, obviously. So only with openness and cooperation can we open up keys for the future. And in China, we have not just a manufacturing industry, but also industrial park. And we have global investors from all continents, from Europe, from Africa, from others. And we have European investors from Southeast Asian countries. They're all operating in our industrial parks. So standing at this point, when there are no actually borders among the countries, for example, I regard myself as not just a Chinese citizen, but also an Ethiopian businesswoman. And there's global market for me to create value. I'm not just operating in Africa merely for money. We can go to virtually everywhere in this world to do business. And the global market is global rather than an individual market for Europe or for America or for others. So for China and EU relations, yes, of course, there are surely challenges. But more importantly, we need to work together to find opportunities through cooperation among all the challenges. And that is actually what brings us here for this dialogue. 1 year ago, when I was in Ethiopia, I was thinking that not far away from our factory, somewhere in Egypt, there was war. A lot of kids lost their homes or even their lives. And in almost every country in Africa, there are a large number of poor people. So except for national interests, what can we do to this world? That is what we need to think, because every life is equal. And when life was born, they're not labeled as what nationality or what country they're from. So what I really hope from a business side is that Europe and China can find a sustainable way where they could find long-term and shared success. Thank you.
It's a voice from enterprise. I think the Mrs. Elisa Hörhager, she has another meeting at 4 o'clock, so she left earlier. In her speech, he talked a lot about subsidies in China. So, and when we heard from the enterprise, I think the competitiveness of Chinese products or the Chinese production is not the subsidies. It's the supply chain, mature supply chain, and ecological production, ecological environment. That's produce the competitiveness. I would like to thank all the panelists for the speech. And at the end, I would like to ask the young leader representative, Mr. Lee Quang Tai from Vietnam, to share his opinion with us.
Well, thank you. Well, I would just like to thank all of the honorable speakers today on the panel for their insights and the discussion. So my name is Lee. I'm a young leader for the GYLD and a policy officer for the European Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. So my question, I would like to bring the focus of the core engine of the EU-China economic relationship, which is the competitiveness. So to understand this, I actually outlined 3 fundamental pillars that I would like to highlight. One would be the people, the demographic, the talent pool, both vast and increasingly skilled, which is a huge, clear advantage to China. Second would be the system, a capacity for long-term relationship, strategic planning, rapid mobilization, which is undeniably very effective in China. And third would be what I want to highlight the most is the regulatory environment, which historically has been one of the most complex pillars from the European perspective. And the EU Commission's own assessment has consistently highlighted that the regulations in China are not as a neutral factor, but as a significant barrier. And this is under the whole framework of partner for cooperation, economic competitor, and systemic rival. And the perception of this complex regulatory environment was a key contributor to the stagnation of the landmark Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, the CCAI. And this stagnation is particularly in stark contrast when we look at, at the broad regional context where other countries like Vietnam, for example, have actively reformed their regulations to align with international agreements and paving the way for the Vietnam-EU Free Trade Agreement, the CPTPP, as well as 2 recent comprehensive strategic partnerships with both the UK and France. So the current situation that we're seeing here is, it presents some kind of a paradox. So we see a lot of the potential in the EU-China, economic relationship, but also we see a lot of competition within the region as well. So my question would be threefold. It addressed to any members of the panel. Well, we talk a lot about the, we talk about regulations, we talk about the whole recalibration of the EU-China relationship, and, dialogues and different approaches to, the relationship itself. So, first of all, how do you see the current trajectory of the China's regulatory environment in practice today? Are we seeing a shift from, a framework perceived as more of a shield to one that acts as an enabler for high-quality investment for the EU beyond the 50 years? Second would be how regulations evolve, not just to improve China's own competitive attractiveness, but also to become a genuine asset for the EU-China partnership. And third, and the last one, would be what specific shift in the EU own approach necessary to proactively encourage and facilitate this positive development. Thank you.
So, thank you for your sharing your opinion. I think Vietnam is analyzing Chinese experience very deeply, and I think they have quite clear how to understanding about the Chinese development and the Chinese system. So for your question, I would like to ask some panelists to give some comment. Okay, so maybe Mr. Schneider? Yeah? Okay. So maybe Mr. Bonana? Huh?
I think in China, experience is very dialectical thinking about regulation and development. Again, in Chinese we say, 在发展中规范.
Regulation in development, development in regulation.
Creation. First, you need creation, development, then regulation. Within the further innovation, and then you need a new regulation. But the European approach is very tighten regulation first, and then AI cannot grow up. I think China learned from both the Europeans and the US model. US laissez-faire, Europe strict regulation, China midway. So that's the meaning of the China, 中国. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I think that today we had the very nice discussion. I will wrap up. Maybe in Chinese, it's more, for me, easier. No.
And thanks will be given to your remarks and discussion, which are very inspiring and constructive. I believe that the future development between China and EU relations, first of all, we have to intensify the communication and exchange. Right now, the exchange is not sufficient. Until now, we have adopted the visa-free policies to African countries, to welcome African countries to come and also to communicate with us, including tourism. So I believe this adoption of the policies can apply to Europe as well. And second, both sides, we believe, can clarify and correct our understanding and cognition, which would be impartial, which is pragmatic, which is based on truth and reality. So this kind of communication will be warmly welcome. And the third one is that the China-EU's relation, by definition, by China, would be the partnership. So to European unions, we do not deem it as the foe. Some of the individual members take the national interest and security as the excuse to bar the import of Chinese products, and is ridiculous and hilarious. And we do not have an interest in this kind of excuse, the so-called excuse based on the so-called national interest and national security. Some European countries, in terms of eavesdropping or in terms of the national security, have adopted some means. And to this kind of claims again or complaints against China, we do not accept. And as for the policy making by European Union to China should be based on the correct understanding about China. The decision makers from EU are not correct enough, and some of them are even with the bias and the prejudices. So I do believe that China's decision making is based on truth, but the decision-making positions on EU side sometimes are very hilarious and based on lies. For example, the lies about Xinjiang. So we encourage the decision makers of EU would be based on truth, and also you have to consider the interest of your own nationals, whether it is beneficial to your nationals or not. Last but not least, I'd like to share with you my personal observation. In the future, we have to avoid this kind of phenomena that is what we call as to self-fulfilling prophecy. So does it mean? What does it mean? It means that based on the expectation or belief on something that would taken in the future, this kind of preemptive assumptions that would determine them to do something right now. But this kind of preemptive assumption would not happen. So this kind of negative assumption or preemptive assumption would lead to the bad decision. I feel that some of the negative behaviors is based on this negatively preemptive assumptions or illusions. That is something we do not want to see. We have to avoid this kind of assumptions or phenomena. Thank you again for the contributions by the panelists and your participation. Thank you.